Hey everybody, this is James P. Wagner here. I'm here with Nick Hale. Hey Nick.
Hey James, hey everybody.
And this is the Publisher's Speakeasy, which is a little secret thing we do. Shh, don't tell anybody. Where we answer questions that you have sent in or that people have asked us at live events. Usually things that are repeat questions that we get. We said when we started this, we want to do this so we don't have to answer the same questions over and over. But we know we're going to anyway. But yeah, again, secret stuff from behind the scenes from publishers about publishing and poetry topics. And so one question that we get all the time, actually this is a big part in some of our seminars even, but from, people of, all different levels of poetry, they say, how do you go about finding publications to submit your poetry to? And that one's a multi-layered, question because there's a lot of answers to that. One of them would be, the tried and true method that people have used for a lot of years, is the writer's market, which was a big publication, for a lot of years, authors swear by it. And then there's actually a branch off of that called the Poets Market, which sort of specializes just in poetry, a smaller version of that. And those books are both good because they list you, magazines, journals, things like that, even book publishers. And usually they tell you, like how to submit to it, what kind of submit, how many submissions they're getting a month, what their acceptance ratios are, things like that. But the problem with that, as Nick and I often point out, is that the data gets skewed a little bit after it comes out because, it might be published in January or February. About 2 or 3 months after that happens, the statistics might be all different. And so you might not be getting complete information because, say that there's a magazine in there and it's like, oh, that it's this readership, this many people submitting a month. After 3 months being in the writer's market, that number could have doubled or tripled, and then you would have no way of knowing that.
Yeah, and one sort of next best thing would be magazines, like Poets and Writers is a good example for poetry. But there are also fiction ones out there that have calls for submissions and info on publishers in the magazines themselves. And these are a little better because they come out once a month, but still they even once a month might not be fast enough to keep up with the times with how fast things change these days with instant communication. And two, again, when this is something we didn't really touch on with writers market, but both of those focus on a very tight circle of sort of within the industry publishers. And so you're not going to get smaller presses or indie magazines or anything like that in most of the time advertised in those types of publications.
Yeah, I mean, in recent
You know,
years, more of them have been, but there is like a, I mean, especially for, writers market, it costs X amount to put an ad in there. So, not everybody is going to make the investment to do that. But more small presses, though, actually have been doing that in recent years. But, a lot of them have actually been going with, another thing that we recommend, though, which is duotrope.com, which is more up to date because with that, it's like you're going to get the live statistics. I think it's pretty much updated, every couple of days or weekly, at the very
yeah,
latest. But there's a much more comprehensive list of things, and that's also not just for poetry; it's for fiction, nonfiction, etc. And then the benefit about that though is that there's listings of thousands of small journals, presses, things like that, but also people who submit to those things are kind of reporting their experience submitting to these publications. So they might be like, oh, I heard back in 2 weeks, I heard back in 6 months. They kind of have like an acceptance ratio also of like how many submissions they get versus how many things that they take. So it's basically like a much more up to date writers or poets market. So that's something that we
yeah.
recommend. It's also cheaper because it's only like five
Is it
dollars
five
a month.
dollars a month? Is it?
Yeah, something like that. I mean,
Yeah,
it may be a little bit more expensive now, but generally speaking, it's it's like it's five. I couldn't imagine it being more than 10 a month. So whereas like the writers market, the big thick one, that's like a
right.
$50, purchase or
Back
whatever.
in my
So
day, Duotrope was free.
I
Well, the
do
other nice
remember
thing
once
about it,
upon a time it was free, but yeah, then it got
yeah,
just so
it was
ridiculously.
donations only, and then people weren't donating. The nice thing
How
about
it
it
always
too
happens.
is that you can filter. So you can look up anything publications with reading fees. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you could look up, high acceptance rate publications or indie publications or magazines and journals. Like there are all these different variables you can search for. So if you have a specific sort of thing that you're looking for, it becomes a lot easier than having to skim through a whole book.
Yeah.
So Duotrope is definitely like the modern version of the writer's market. Is in my opinion, is the best way to find stuff, but it's not the only one. Uh,
No.
Another thing you can do is social media. Um, I know a lot of people who are in Facebook groups, which actually the whole point of the group is just to share publications looking for submissions. Um, Sometimes you can come across ads. Sometimes, if you have friends on social media, I think most people have friends. Um, if they come across an ad or some post about a call for submissions, they might tag you. You could say, "Hey, if you see something, let me know." And vice versa, help your writer friends out. Tag them if you see something that looks interesting. They might be interested in submitting to. Um,
Yeah.
and it may sound silly, but one of the nice things about social media, and one of the things we talk about a lot, right, is matchmaking. It's not just about finding publications to submit to; it's finding ones that fit you.
Hmm.
Your social media ads are tailored to you. So if social media decides that this publications ad is worth showing you, it's probably worth looking into. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's doing all of the homework for you, basically. It's nice.
Yeah, and one of the benefits of like, a lot of social media groups, like I know on Facebook, there's, tons and tons of, poetry sharing groups. And a lot of times there's people there who will actually be like, oh, hey, this publication is taking submissions, and if you're in that group and people kind of know sort of what you're writing, or they know like, hey, there's this, this anthology is happening and it's taking poetry about, trees or whatever. And hey, I just saw that, you just wrote this poem about a tree the other day. Maybe you should send into that. So, you can kind of get almost a little bit more personalized matchmaking that way. Some of these groups even actually, the moderators will even do like a bi-weekly or a monthly update where they actually pin at the top like a list of, oh, these are some publications we know of taking submissions right now just for their people to do that. And then there's other kinds of newsletters and stuff out there, like Poets and Writers. They list things that are taking, submissions in there. They're pretty dedicated for poetry. There's, various other ones, maybe of a smaller scale, or maybe they'll have fewer recommendations, but, maybe they'll be better or worse depending on, what it is that you write or your style or topic or things like that. And then, also just never underestimate the power of getting involved in your local poetry community if you're fortunate enough to actually have one. Because a lot of times, there might be a, local publication that, you would want to take part in. And in that case, it's like, you get to meet other, poets and authors. And, some of them, maybe there's even, publishers or editors in your local community. Maybe they have a publication that they're doing, or maybe there's an editor who works on a publication somewhere else. And again, like matchmaking, it's and then sometimes the whole who type of deal, because getting a referral or a recommendation or something like that, things tend to work out much better in terms of the ratio when that happens. So never underestimate the power of doing that too.
Yeah, and beyond that, with your local communities, that was the next thing I was going to suggest, going to particularly workshops and readings. I like workshops because especially if it's a critique workshop where everybody's there to sort of analyze or critique the poem. A lot of times, maybe I'm biased because I run one, but a lot of times I'll get people coming to my workshop and they'll bring a poem, and then I'll have somebody else comment on the poem. This X publication is looking for this exact type of poem. This would be great
Mhm.
for that. I think once you're done revising it, you should submit it. And so a lot of that sort of that word of mouth, it's not necessarily just the publications that I'm working on. But people from
Mhm.
my group will refer others, we'll refer each other to publications. And I know there's a local reading of mine where the guy who hosts it is always, when he advertises his reading, he puts up any publications that he knows of that are looking for submissions. So
Yeah.
a lot of times, yeah, just going there, you might find somebody who could refer you somewhere you might want to publish your stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's like another thing just about, researching and looking for markets for this type of thing too, is like in the beginning, it's probably going to be a lot of legwork because, you're, especially, I mean, if you're just like coming in for the first time and you're looking for places to submit, there's going to be a lot of research, a lot of legwork involved trying to figure out like, what you're writing, what's taking what it is you're writing or considering what it is you're writing and things like that. So it might, progress kind of like, watching the grass grow in the beginning where it's like, it's a lot of work for not a lot of results, but the more you do it, it's like you're going to start building up a database, and relationships. And so, like, when you're, you've got some poems published out there, maybe you've got some journals you regularly submit to, then they're going to be like, oh, okay, we're familiar with your stuff. Have you considered submitting here? Or, hey, our publishing company, we also do this and we like your stuff in this. So maybe you'll send in here. And then you'll sort of start developing a Rolodex of various places that have been welcoming to your stuff, and that you can constantly submit to, or publishers that are constantly coming out with projects. I mean, I know one thing that we do at Local Gems is we get we do local publications like in so many different places, anthologies, in various areas, have the launch events and do those things, etc. What are you laughing at?
I know what you're going to say.
What was I going to say?
I don't want to spoil it.
Okay, well, you might be completely wrong on what I was going to say. I was
We'll
going to say
see.
though that one of the things that we do with that though is we'll meet people that way, and then later on because we'll have the email list, it'll be like oh hey, for all you poets say from Pennsylvania or whatever who we're in this, it's like some of you have written on this topic, and we're doing this anthology that's a theme, and we'll send people like a thing that this is happening, or like we're doing Bards Against Hunger, that's open to everybody everywhere, and we'll send that to the whole email list about that. So just by virtue of getting into the one publication, as a publisher, we notify them of various anthologies and projects that they are eligible to submit to. So once you get into a few areas, you kind of start to get a whole bunch of various avenues that start to kind of interconnect with you, and then sometimes you don't even have to do the research anymore. The research will kind of just come to you just by happenstance if you have these relationships.
Yeah,
So
it almost gets to the point where you have people telling you constantly about anthologies and other publications
mhm.
taking submissions, and you're looking at it and saying, "Well, I don't write enough in a year to submit to all these places."
Yeah,
Um,
that becomes the other problem
yeah,
later.
which
But yeah,
which may
that
be a
that
good
wasn't what
problem
you
to
were
have.
thinking I was going to say, was it?
No, no, I was. It was about the comment that you often make at some of our regional launches about moving.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I guess I'll okay, so I'll add that in there. Yeah, one thing I tell to people a lot of times is, oh, you want to have the option to submit to more publications, move, because basically if you're in like Eastern PA and there's like a publication here, but then you move to like Northern North Carolina, there's a local publication there. It's like a lot of times like the Eastern PA one's not going to be like, oh, you can't submit anymore because you don't live here because you've already been there. So you submit there, and then now you can submit to this new one, and then like a year later you move to Boston, there might be one there that it's like you can submit to that one. So because a lot of times these things are like significant ties. So I just say, regionally, if you're looking to get a lot of local publications, just move a lot or go to school or work in different places, things like that. But that's, that's kind of a facetious thing though. But yeah, so, like Nick was saying though, eventually when you get enough poems out there and, stuff like that, you'll start getting so many recommendations for things that you'll have trouble keeping up for them actually. And then that's a whole other thing, because then you start needing to organize like, where did I send my poems to? Like, because we get some people sometimes who are like, oh, I think I sent this here, but maybe I sent it here instead, because they don't really like write it or catalog it. And so that kind of becomes a whole other art of keeping track of your submissions, where they've been, how long they've been, and, all that stuff. And then
Yeah,
if it's open to submit it again somewhere else.
we had someone for this one annual publication. One of their the, so the guidelines request you send up to 3 poems. One of their 3 poems, 3 years in a row, was the same one, and it was taken, I think, the first time they sent it in
Yeah. Well,
because
that's somebody just not keeping track of what it
right,
is that they're
exactly,
sending
because
in.
because
Yeah.
you lose track, especially when you're sending so many places at once. And for going for the facetious answer, I found a lot of publications to submit to after I started doing anthologies myself. After I started editing anthologies, and now my answer isn't become a publisher or an editor, but if you look through the bio sections of a lot of these things, people will cite their own projects, and I actually a lot of those early places that I submitted outside of our own projects were from people who had submitted to our work and were doing projects that I thought was interesting. And so sometimes just looking through the bio sections of anthologies or magazines and looking at things that other people are doing, you can find, especially if you're interested in submitting to blogs or websites or e-zines, because those are a lot of people will list those, and a lot of those have very interesting twists or gimmicks to them, which, in my opinion, makes it more fun. But that,
Yeah.
especially when you're getting started, that's a great way to sort of get yourself out there and start to make those connections, like you were talking about, James, with matchmaking, because really getting your foot in the door and making some friends who are publishers, it goes a long way towards finding more places to get published, and then eventually you run into the problem we have of so many publications, so few words.
Yeah, because just for those out there who don't know, we've published thousands of poets literally in different anthologies over the years, and so dozens of them have publications or are editors on magazines or this or that or whatever. So we are constantly getting sent things to send in or whatever. The point, like I don't write enough to keep up with it at this point, so that's a thing like that. But yeah, one thing that a lot of people overlook is the bio section. I mean, so it depends if there is a bio section or if the bios are actually with the poem, because sometimes that varies based on the publication. But looking through bios in an anthology, if you're ever in an anthology, you just look through the other poets in there and see what's in their description, because sometimes this person might be in charge of this poetry group and that poetry group has a publication. This person might be an editor on this magazine, etc. So there's just various ways to do that. A lot of people, don't often utilize, all the information that's actually in a bio section, but there is a lot in there and it can be very
Yeah,
helpful with that.
I
Especially because
remember.
you've already kind of got to connect right there, because it's like, you're going to email them and be like, hey, we were both in, this Doodly Dod publications, Doodly Dod quarterly. We were just both in that. And, I noticed that you're an editor on this, maybe, I have some poems that might fit that or whatever. So you've already kind of got a connection and an in, and you're not kind of coming from completely from the outside. So
And
that's helpful in that case too.
you've also got the social proof of somebody who likes your poetry also accepted mine.
Yeah.
So my stuff must be worthy of your publication as well. And it doesn't always work, but it's definitely an extra leg up. And I mean, I remember when I moved here. You probably don't remember this. When I was looking through the first anthology that we ever did, or first that I ever did, and we ever did together. In the one of the bio sections, one of the people mentioned that he was a member of the Poetry Society of Virginia, living in Northern Virginia, and I looked him up, and it just so happened that the time that I looked him up, he was featuring maybe an hour and a half away from where I was living. And I thought, wow, this is great. I didn't knew there was a poetry community here because I just moved here. So I went and went to his feature, and as I was walking to the room because I got there late, of course, because I wasn't familiar with the area. Uh,
Oh
he
yeah, that's the reason.
yeah, as yeah, well, this that traffic around here is awful, man. I mean, you should know that. But
Yep.
I got there late. As I was walking in, he's talking about this poem he's about to read. He said, I wrote this poem specifically for this anthology that I thought looked really interesting about fantasy poetry. And I thought, that's my anthology. He was reading the poem that he had sent in to Voice of the Bards at the time.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I actually
yeah,
do remember that story. I remember you telling me not long after that happened, and I was like, "Oh, that's a nice coincidence, and also a nice welcome right into it because you're walking in for
right.
the first time and you edited the anthology he's reading the poem from." So,
It was great. I mean, the story has a bit of a sad ending because when I asked the host how often he does this reading, he said, yeah, every other year.
yeah, that is a bit of a sad ending, um, but yeah, but it's little things like that, that start making these connections, and you never know really where they're going to come from, because sometimes you do the 6 degrees of separation when it comes to writers. Like I'll get new Facebook friend requests or whatever, and I'll be like, oh, this person who submitted this thing I never met before, I have like 76 friends in common with them from like various other parts of the country and various events and things like that. So it does start to become a web. And so hopefully the idea is you get to a point where you got so many connections that you're just getting constant recommendations about where to submit your stuff to. But in the beginning, like we said, writers market, poets market, duotrope especially, little newsletters, listings, things like that. There's a lot of them out there. But then another question in terms of just finding publications to submit to, I guess, is doing your research about the particulars of the publication, so that there's a better chance that the ones you submit to you might get accepted in. And this is like a whole other, we do entire seminars on this topic. But one of the good things about something like, say, duotrope is they won't just tell you the publication. They'll tell you, like, because basically you go there and you enter in, like, what is you're looking for poetry. You enter the genre of poetry, like what style, any theme, genre, subgenre, like all these things, length of the poem or whatever, and then they match you with what they think is a good match that way. And so these are like all these definitions of what it is you're writing that you want to actually do this coordination. Duotrope is a great tool because it does a lot of that coordination for you. And other things, though, it's like you might see a listing of stuff, but then you want to go to the website, see what they're currently taking, look at sample stuff of what they've already taken, and kind of see like, oh, is this a match for me or is this not a match for me, for what I'm doing? Because that's one little thing I'll say when looking for stuff is, because some people they give very bad advice about submit your work everywhere. And I would say I would very particularly adjust that to submit your work everywhere that it's eligible or genuinely going to be considered, because when you're doing it beyond that, like if there's a publication that has they'll say we'll take up to, because I mean, with a lot of our publications, we say we take up to 100 lines, of a poem. Now, if somebody's like 101 lines, like that's not necessarily going to disqualify them necessarily. But we've had people who've sent in like the Epic of freaking Gilgamesh in terms of length of poems, and they think it's like, well, clearly they did not read the guidelines on this. So, if you have a poem that's 300 lines long, and there's a publication that deals with like haiku length poetry, probably gonna not be a good idea to send your stuff in there, because that's just gonna kind of waste both of your guys' time, and everybody's time is valuable these days.
Yeah, and also just to tack onto that, make sure that if once you do find that match, you follow their directions. And that's again like one of the nice things about Duotrope and some of these other online resources is a lot of them are more upfront about the format that the publishers want the thing in and how to submit. A lot of them use tools like Submittable, which the nice thing about Submittable, I've used it a few times and I'm not the biggest fan personally, but that's just because maybe I'm a dinosaur. The nice thing about Submittable is that it's really hard to not follow the directions because it's
Yeah.
a form. It's basically like using a wizard. So it forces you on Rails to follow the directions as to how to submit properly.
Yeah. So, that's just a little aside for when you do find these things, because, it's not just finding and like, oh, this thing exists. It's like making sure that, what you've got is what they're considering. That's kind of a big part of that. And, again, there's all different types of things. There's journals and magazines that have constant issues. And then there's like single things like, anthologies with a theme or things like that. So, they come in all shapes and sizes, some in print, some online. And then there's even other things where it's like multimedia, where it's like maybe it's not you're submitting your written poem, maybe you're submitting an audio file of you reciting your poem. There's even things like that out there that like blog talk radios or podcasts or things like that, and even YouTube channels that do that. So that's just another possible avenue if you submit your poetry. No shortage.
Yeah, and one final thing I would say is that this might be sort of a related question that I'm answering without anybody asking is, is there sort of a coveted publication? Is this like, are there tiers basically of, oh, okay, this is like your beginner publications and this is what you really want to shoot for, sort of like, I can't think of something comparable. If you're in like the best American poetry or something like that, and I think there isn't really a big collection of like those you've really made it if you get accepted here type of thing. Like I guess you could say the Harvard of poetry. But don't worry about that. Like, sure, there are some publications that are really hard to get into and they have really, really, really low acceptance rates. And some of them are so hard to get into that you have all this whole group of people who write poetry about how much they loathe that publication for not accepting their work. Because I've seen some of that. But
Yep.
don't worry about exclusivity or prestige in publications, especially at first. It's not like publishing in a local publication is going to hurt your chances of getting published in something bigger because I don't know, because you look like a pedestrian because you're just the local peasant. No, it's that's not how it works most of the time. And
Yeah.
in the places that it does work, they don't
like
deserve your stuff.
Yeah, like I know that like in the academic setting, for example, it's like they have the whole publisher perish and they're looking for specifically peer-reviewed publications. So, in that situation, it kind of depends on, what the situation is at your place. But we've had plenty of college professors, teachers, and other things like that in our publications. I'm actually because I used to be a college professor, but also when I was actually in graduate school, one of my professors, who was my professor at the time in a class I took, has become a regular submitter to a local publication that, I did around here and has been doing it for years after the fact, so, that happens there. But yeah, in most cases, yeah, there's some people who have this idea like, oh, if you publish locally, you're not going to get into the big leagues. And I'm thinking that's like the same mentality of like, oh, okay, if you join Little League, you're never going to get into the Yankees. It's like that's kind of exactly the opposite. It's like you need to kind of start somewhere, like you don't jump out from like, okay, grade school t-ball and now you're in the professional sports. You don't go from your second grade school play or Christmas pageant to being on Broadway. There's you got to go on the stepping stones, and building up a list of publications will sometimes help you get into other publications too. So but it's all a snowball effect, and it all rolls. And again, it'll seem slow in the beginning, but the more you do, more opportunities will arise. So that's hopefully encouraging, because once you get beyond a certain threshold, it's like you won't even have to do research anymore.
Unless you're trying to figure out which ones you actually want to submit to and which ones you have to skip because you don't have enough poetry to submit everywhere.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
but then you just hire like 4 or 5 secretaries to handle that and all that, and then it'll all work out. Yep. So yeah, well, hopefully we did a good job answering this question. Thank you for being here at the Publisher Speakeasy. Shh, don't tell anybody. Take a look in the description there if you're interested in free poetry prompts. If you have any questions for us to answer in these things, please send them our way, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
everybody.